We saved you a seat across the table, Marin. How thoughtful. You're nobody without Grant. You're confusing being close to power with owning it. She grabbed me, Grant.
Don't make this bigger than it is.
After her husband's mistress told her, "You're nobody without him," Marin quietly walked away, then built the very company that would become her husband's biggest rival. Stay to the end to see how she proved her name could stand on its own. The first thing Marin Mercer noticed when she entered the private dining room was not her husband. It was her chair. For almost 9 years, whenever Ashford Meridian hosted one of these small client dinners, Marin had sat at Grant's right hand. Not because she was his wife, not because someone thought the arrangement looked elegant in photographs. She sat there because most of the people around that table had once called her directly when their contracts were failing, their divisions were bleeding money, or their boards were threatening to walk away. Tonight, Sloan Merrick occupied that seat. Marin stopped just inside the doorway. The room sat 12 floors above Fifth Avenue, behind dark walnut doors that separated the private members club from the noise of Manhattan below. Soft lamps reflected against polished silverware. 12 executives surrounded the long table. Crystal glasses caught the low amber light. Beyond the windows, Midtown glittered like a second ceiling turned upside down. Grant rose when he saw her. Marin. There was surprise in his face before he covered it with the easy smile that had closed billion-dollar negotiations and convinced anxious investors to wait another quarter. "You came. You invited me. I wasn't sure you'd feel up to it." His eyes dropped briefly toward the curve beneath her black maternity dress. Marin placed one hand against the small of her back. "I'm 7 months pregnant, Grant. I'm not recovering from open-heart surgery." A few people laughed politely. Grant crossed the room and kissed her cheek. It lasted barely a second, long enough to satisfy anyone watching, not long enough to feel like a husband greeting his wife. Then Sloan stood. She wore ivory, which Marin might have found amusing if the choice had not felt so deliberate. The dress was tailored rather than revealing, expensive without announcing its price, exactly the kind of clothing worn by women who wanted a room to notice their authority before their beauty. "Marin," Sloan said warmly, "you look wonderful. So do you." Sloan touched the back of the chair beside Grant. "We saved you a seat across from Roland." Not beside Grant, across from him. Marin looked at her husband. Grant either failed to notice the significance or had decided noticing it would create a problem he did not want to solve. "That work for you?" he asked. Marin smiled. "Perfectly," she sat. That single decision cost her more effort than anyone in the room could have imagined. 3 years earlier, she would have asked Sloan to move. 2 years earlier, Grant would never have allowed someone else to sit there. 1 year earlier, Marin would have told herself the seating arrangement meant nothing. Tonight, she simply watched. Roland Keene sat to her left. At 61, the founder of Keene Industrial Holdings had the calm manner of a man wealthy enough to stop performing wealth. He wore an old Navy suit, no pocket square, no flashy watch, and the same steel-framed glasses Marin remembered from the first time Ashford Meridian had nearly lost his account. Roland looked at her belly, then at her face. "How are you feeling? Everyone keeps asking me that like I'm carrying explosives." Roland smiled. "I was going to say you look tired. That's less polite. It's also more accurate." "I like accurate." "So do I. That's why I used to call you instead of your husband." Marin gave him a warning look, but Roland was already lifting his water glass. Across the table, Grant was listening to Sloan describe Ashford Meridian's expansion into restructuring work for privately held manufacturing companies. Marin had spent nearly 6 years trying to convince Grant that the firm needed exactly that capability. Back then, he had called the market too fragmented. Now Sloan described the move as an inevitable evolution of Grant's vision. Marin waited for irritation to rise. Instead, what she felt was exhaustion. She had been gone from daily operations for only 6 months. 6 months, yet the stories were already changing. Not the facts. Stories. And Marin was beginning to understand that stories became facts when enough powerful people repeated them. Dinner moved through its first course. The conversation shifted between interest rates, acquisitions, labor costs, and the pressure several clients were facing from activist investors. Marin spoke only when someone addressed her directly. She noticed Sloan doing the opposite. Sloan entered every conversational opening. She finished Grant's explanations. She referenced meetings Marin had once attended. She knew which clients preferred first names and which liked titles. She even knew Roland disliked sparkling water. None of that bothered Marin by itself. Competent executives learn people. What bothered her was how naturally Grant allowed Sloan to speak as though she represented both the company and him. By the time the entree arrived, Roland leaned toward Marin. "You remember the Keene continuity model?" Marin almost laughed. I remember sleeping in your Cleveland office for 2 nights because your operations chief refused to give us clean numbers. He still claims the spreadsheet problem was somebody else's fault. It was his fault. I know. Roland turned toward Grant. We're thinking about bringing back part of that retention structure Marin built during the turnaround. Sloan answered before Grant could. We've actually modernized that framework substantially. Marin looked at her. Sloan continued smoothly. Under Grant's leadership, the old continuity model became our integrated account stability system. Better reporting, stronger escalation procedures, much more scalable. Roland's eyebrows rose. Did you change the trigger sequence? We simplified it. That wasn't what I asked. For the first time that evening, Sloan hesitated. Marin knew the mistake instantly. The trigger sequence was never the complicated part, she said. The table quieted slightly. Sloan turned toward her. Marin continued in the same calm tone. The first stage trigger looks at account behavior. The second stage trigger looks at internal response failure. If you simplify them into one measurement, you lose the distinction between a client becoming unstable and your own team creating instability. Roland nodded. Exactly. Sloan smiled, but the smile had tightened around the edges. Our current model accounts for both. I'm sure it does. Grant looked between them. Marin designed the original framework, he said. Sloan's team has been updating it. His words were reasonable. That was what made them sting. Marin designed the original framework. Past tense. A museum label, as if she had built an early prototype that smarter people had eventually improved. Roland leaned back. Original framework kept us from leaving. Grant gave a short laugh. You weren't really leaving. Roland looked at him over the rim of his glasses. We had counsel reviewing termination language. Grant stopped smiling. Marin felt something shift inside her. She remembered the crisis. Of course she did. She remembered flights to Cleveland, meals from vending machines, sleeping 4 hours in 3 days, and calling Grant at 2 in the morning because Keene's board had demanded a revised plan before sunrise. But Grant had been in New York fighting to keep another client at the same time. He knew Keene had been angry. Had he truly forgotten how close they had come to losing them? Roland turned back toward his plate. The conversation moved on. But Sloan did not look at Marin again for the next 20 minutes. That was how Marin knew the correction had landed. After dessert, Grant was pulled into a conversation near the windows with 2 private equity executives. Roland joined another client at the bar. Marin stood carefully, feeling the familiar pull across her lower back. The baby shifted. She pressed a palm against the side of her stomach. Not now, she whispered. She giving you trouble? Sloan's voice came from behind her. Marin turned. Sloan held 2 glasses of mineral water. She offered one. Marin declined. I'm fine. You always say that. Do I? Sloan took a slow sip. You said it when you went on leave. Marin studied her. There was no reason for Sloan to follow her into the hallway. No professional reason. Which meant this conversation was the real reason Sloan had been watching her all night. Marin walked toward a quieter alcove near the coat room. Sloan followed. Ashford Meridian is doing well, Sloan said. I'm aware. Better than well, actually. We've accelerated 2 expansion plans. We closed Harrow. We're almost done with Maybridge. Corporate development has finally stopped waiting for 10 committees to approve every move. Marin turned. Was there a question in there? Sloan's mouth curved. I thought you might want to know the company is fine. I never thought it wasn't. Some people have difficulty stepping away. Do they? They worry the machine will stop without them. Marin looked at Sloan for a long moment. Then she understood. This was not confidence. Confidence would not have required the hallway. It would not have required the seat beside Grant. It would not have required a recital of closed deals. Marin almost felt sorry for her. Almost. If you believed Ashford Meridian was better without me, Marin said quietly, you wouldn't need to keep telling me. The change in Sloan's face was tiny. Most people would have missed it. Marin did not. She had spent her career reading tiny changes in people who were deciding whether to sign, leave, sue, surrender, or lie. Sloan stepped closer. You think you're still important there? I didn't say that. You don't have to, Sloan. No, really. Let's stop pretending. Her voice dropped. You come into the room, and everyone acts like some founding queen has returned from exile. The Marin almost laughed. A founding queen? You know what I mean. I really don't. Sloan's eyes hardened. Grant doesn't need you anymore. There it was. Not the company, Grant. Marin felt the sentence settle between them. She could have exposed the affair right there. She could have asked how Sloan knew what Grant needed at home. She could have raised her voice and forced half the dining room into the hallway. Instead, Marin said, that sounds like something you need to believe. Sloan moved another step closer. You're nobody without him, Marin. The only reason anyone in that room knows your name is because you married Grant Mercer. For one strange second, Marin felt almost nothing. Then memories began arriving in pieces. Her 27-year-old self sitting on an office floor surrounded by boxes because Ashford Meridian could not afford movers. Grant asleep beneath a conference table after a 30-hour funding sprint. Marin talking a client out of terminating a contract while Grant sat beside her scribbling numbers onto a legal pad. The first investor dinner where someone had called her Grant's assistant. Grant correcting him immediately. She's my partner. When had he stopped saying that? Marin looked at Sloane. You should be careful. Sloane's expression sharpened. Is that a threat? No. Marin turned toward the dining room. It's advice. You're confusing being close to power with owning it. She took 2 steps. Sloane grabbed her wrist. It was not a violent attack. It did not need to be. The intimacy of it was worse. Marin looked down at Sloane's fingers around her skin. Let go. Sloane released her almost instantly, but someone had already seen them. Grant. He came through the doorway, his jaw tightening. What happened? Marin waited. Sloane answered first. Nothing. Marin looked at her husband. She grabbed me. Sloane sighed. Grant, I touched her arm because she was walking away while I was speaking. You grabbed my wrist for a second. Grant rubbed the bridge of his nose. Marin knew that gesture. He used it when his executives brought him problems he considered beneath his attention. And suddenly, before he spoke, she knew what he was going to do. He was going to manage the situation, not defend her. Manage it, Marin, he said. You're exhausted. Her chest went still. Grant continued. It's been a long night. You probably shouldn't have stayed this late. Sloane's lowered her eyes. Marin almost admired the performance. She turned to Grant. Did you hear what I said? What did I say? He exhaled. You said she grabbed you. And, Marin? And Grant glanced toward the dining room. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. The words were quiet, measured, almost gentle. They struck harder than anything Sloane had said. Marin stared at him. Behind Grant, through the open doorway, she could see his chair at the head of the table, Sloane's chair beside it, her chair across from him. A whole marriage reduced to seating arrangements. She heard herself ask, if I never came back to Ashford Meridian, would it matter? Grant frowned. What if I never came back? This isn't the time. Answer me. Marin, of course it would matter. To you or to the company? Grant looked genuinely confused. Maybe that was the cruelest part. He did not understand why the distinction mattered. The company would adjust, he said finally. It already has. Marin nodded. Grant reached for her arm. She stepped back before he touched her. His face changed. Marin, you're right. That's not what I meant. No, I think it is. What are you talking about? She looked past him at Sloane, then back at her husband. You told me the company needed one of us running at full speed and our baby needed the other. Grant's eyes narrowed slightly. We agreed on that. Yes, we did. So why are you using it against me now? I'm not. Her voice remained calm, and that calm frightened even her. I'm realizing you already did. Grant stared at her. Marin picked up her coat from the attendant before he could respond. She had almost reached the elevator when Roland called her name, Marin. She stopped. Roland approached slowly, hands in his pockets. He glanced back toward the private dining room. I'm not getting involved in whatever that was. Good. I'm too old for rich people's marriages. Despite everything, she smiled. Thank you. Roland's expression changed. For what it's worth, Grant's wrong about one thing. Marin waited. Companies adjust, he said. That doesn't mean they don't lose something. She looked at him. Roland continued. Some of us remember who kept us there when everything almost collapsed. The elevator doors opened. Marin did not step inside. What exactly do you mean? Roland looked as though he was considering how much to say. Then he shook his head. Not tonight, Roland. You're tired, and I'm not going to explain your own history to you in a hallway. The doors began to close. He caught them with one hand. Go home, Marin. She entered the elevator. As the doors slid shut, Roland added, and maybe start remembering it yourself. The Mercer penthouse was dark when Marin arrived home. Grant had not followed her. She was grateful. For the first time in weeks, silence did not feel lonely. It felt useful. Marin removed her shoes in the foyer and walked barefoot through the living room. Manhattan stretched beyond the glass walls, 1,000 office windows still glowing past midnight. Once, that view had represented everything she and Grant were building. To Tite, it looked like thousands of rooms where other people were still working, while she had somehow become a guest in the company she helped create. The baby moved again. Marin lowered herself onto the sofa. All right, she whispered, placing both hands over her belly. You win, we're sitting. She stayed there for several minutes. Then she opened her phone. Grant had called twice. There was one message, we need to talk when I get home. She did not answer. Instead, Marin searched her contacts and pressed another name. Naomi Pritchard answered on the 4th ring. Marin, did I wake you? It's 12:47 in the morning. What do you think? Sorry. A pause. Then Naomi's voice changed. What happened? Marin looked toward the windows. I need you to review my employment agreement. Another pause. All right, my equity too, Marin. And my maternity leave documents, the confidentiality provisions, anything involving intellectual property. Any restriction that could apply if I left. Naomi became completely awake. Left Ashford Meridian? Yes. Or left Grant? Marin stared at the city. I don't know yet. That answer worries me. It worries me, too. Naomi sighed softly. Do not download anything from the company tonight. I wasn't going to. Do not forward yourself emails. I won't. Do not contact clients. I understand. And do not resign before I read every document you signed. Marin closed her eyes. Okay. Naomi hesitated. Did Grant threaten you? No. Did Sloan? Marin thought of fingers around her wrist, of Sloan sitting beside Grant, of the words nobody without him. No, she said. Not in a way that matters legally. What happened then? Marin looked down at her wedding ring. For years she had believed love meant not keeping score. Who earned which client? Who designed which system? Who got quoted in the press? Whose name appeared first? She had believed marriage made those distinctions irrelevant. Maybe that had been true once. Maybe it had only been true while both people remembered there were two names behind the success. Marin slowly twisted the ring around her finger. I think, she said. I finally heard how Grant talks about the life we built when he thinks I'm no longer part of building it. Naomi was silent. Marin continued. And I need to know exactly what belongs to the company. She stopped. What belongs to the marriage? Another pause. And what belongs to me? Naomi's answer came quietly. Then tomorrow morning we start there. Marin ended the call. She did not remove her wedding ring. Not yet. She did not draft a resignation. She did not pack a suitcase. She did not call a client or make a revenge plan. Instead, she opened a blank notebook she had not used since leaving Ashford Meridian. On the first page, she wrote 3 words. What I built. Then she sat alone beneath the Manhattan lights and began making a list. For the first time in years, Marin was not asking what Grant needed from her. She was asking what remained when she stopped disappearing for him. And somewhere inside that question was the beginning of a company that did not exist yet, a rivalry no one could imagine yet, and a version of Marin Calloway that neither Grant nor Sloan understood they had just awakened. By 9 the next morning, Marin had slept less than 4 hours and already made the first decision Grant would not be able to talk her out of. She sat across from Naomi Pritchard in a conference room overlooking Lexington Avenue, a cup of decaffeinated coffee cooling untouched beside her hand. Naomi had printed 3 folders. One contained Marin's employment agreement. One contained her equity documents. The third contained everything Ashford Meridian had asked her to sign when she stepped away from active executive duties during her pregnancy. Naomi tapped the first folder. Before we talk about your marriage, we talk about the company. Marin nodded. Good, you say that now, I called you. At almost 1 in the morning. I remember. Naomi opened the folder. You are still technically Director of Client Strategy. Extended leave did not terminate your position. You continue to hold vested equity. You have confidentiality obligations. You have intellectual property obligations. There are post-employment restrictions that Ashford Meridian may attempt to enforce if you resign. May attempt? Naomi looked at her over thin black glasses. I'm not giving you a dramatic speech about what is or is not enforceable before I review the facts. Employment restrictions depend on language, jurisdiction, scope, conduct, and what somebody is willing to spend money fighting about. Marin leaned back. So what do I do? You behave as if every decision you make from this point forward will eventually be projected onto a courtroom wall. Marin almost smiled. That sounds exhausting. It is less exhausting than litigation. Naomi closed the folder. Now tell me what happened last night. Marin gave her the shortest version she could. The dinner. Sloan sitting beside Grant. Roland asking about the old framework. Sloan's comment in the hallway. The wrist. Grant arriving. The sentence that still hurt more than everything else. The company would adjust. Naomi listened without interrupting. When Marin finished, she asked, Are Grant and Sloan having an affair? Marin looked toward the window. I think so. You think? I haven't followed either of them with a private investigator. That wasn't my question. Marin exhaled. Yes. Naomi waited. Marin finally said, I know. How long? I don't know. Does Grant know that you know? I don't think he knows what I know about anything anymore. Naomi's face softened slightly. That is not a legal answer. It's the only one I have. Her phone vibrated. Grant. Again. Marin turned it face down. Naomi noticed. You can ignore your husband. You cannot ignore your CEO indefinitely. I know. Do you want to resign? Marin looked at the folders. Last night, the answer had felt obvious. This morning, with papers spread across a lawyer's table and a child shifting under her ribs, everything had weight. Salary, insurance, equity, reputation, a marriage, a company, a baby arriving in less than 3 months. I don't know if I want to resign, she said. Naomi nodded. That's better than pretending you do. I know I don't want to go back. That is a different answer. Yes. Naomi pushed a legal pad toward her. Then don't make a permanent decision because someone humiliated you for 10 minutes. Sloan didn't humiliate me. Good. Grant did. Naomi held her gaze. That sounds more permanent. Marin did not answer. Her phone vibrated again. This time a message appeared. We need to talk today. Marin stared at it. Then she typed, 4 o'clock. Home. Naomi watched. You're seeing him alone? He's my husband. For now. The words should have sounded brutal. Instead, they sounded precise. At 4:15, Grant walked into the penthouse carrying the same expression he wore when a client had created a crisis he intended to solve before dinner. Marin was sitting at the kitchen island with a glass of water. He removed his coat. You left before I could explain. There was nothing to explain, Marin. Did Sloan grab my wrist? Grant's jaw tightened, yes. Did you ask her why? I spoke to her. When this morning? What did she say? Grant paused, that the conversation got heated. Marin nodded once. And she admitted she shouldn't have touched you. She admitted that to you? Yes. Did she apologize to me? No. Grant pulled out the chair opposite her. She will. That's not necessary. He stared. Last night you wanted me to take it seriously. Now you don't want an apology? I wanted my husband to take it seriously when it happened. I did. No, you managed it. His eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means you looked at your pregnant wife and your vice president standing in a hallway, and the first thing you worried about was whether we were creating a scene. That's not fair, isn't it? You were upset. I had a reason, I know that. Then why did you tell me not to make it bigger than it needed to be? Grant pushed a hand through his hair. Because every executive in that room was 20 feet away. Because you and Sloan already have tension. Because I didn't want something personal turning into a corporate spectacle. Marin felt a small, bitter smile form. Something personal. Grant saw it. What? You still don't understand. Then explain it to me. Marin stood slowly. The baby had been sitting low all afternoon, making long periods in one position, uncomfortable. She walked toward the windows. Sloan didn't destroy our marriage. Grant went still. Marin turned. She just made me look at what was already broken. His face changed completely. Don't do this. Do what? Turn one ugly conversation into a decision about our marriage. This isn't about one conversation. Then what is it about? Ashford Meridian. Grant looked almost relieved. That hurt too. Okay, he said. Then we talk about Ashford Meridian. I'm resigning. The relief vanished. No. Marin stared at him. No? You're angry. I'm very calm. That worries me more. I spoke to Naomi. Grant gave a humorless laugh. Of course you did. What does that mean? It means you talked to a lawyer before you talked to me. I tried talking to you last night. That was a fight. That was information. He stood. Marin, you are 7 months pregnant. You stepped back because we agreed you needed to. Nobody pushed you out. I know. So why are you suddenly acting like we forced you from the company? I'm not. Then what are you saying? She studied him. Tell me what I built. Grant blinked. What? At Ashford Meridian. Tell me what I built. He frowned. This is ridiculous. Then it should be easy, Marin. Tell me. Grant looked toward the windows, then back at her. You built the original client escalation process. 1. You led Keen during the restructuring. 2. You helped set up the early account review structure. 3. He stopped. Marin waited. Grant's frustration rose. You want me to list 9 years of work from memory? No. I want to know what you remember when you think of me professionally. That's not the same thing. It is exactly the same thing. He stared at her for several seconds. Then he said, you were critical in the early years. There it was. Marin felt something inside her settle. The early years, that isn't an insult. I know. Then stop looking at me like it is. I'm looking at you like a man who thinks I helped build the foundation but somehow had nothing to do with the building once it got tall. Grant opened his mouth. Marin continued. You remember the visible projects, the meetings with names attached, the things you presented to the board. You don't remember the systems underneath them because once they worked, they became part of the furniture. That is not true. Who owns the account recovery model now? Grant hesitated. Client strategy. Who created the original trigger map? You did. Who rebuilt it after the hail crisis? He paused.
Marin nodded.
Exactly.
Marin, just because I cannot answer a surprise quiz does not mean I erased you.
No, but I helped make it easy for you to forget me. His anger softened slightly. What is that supposed to mean? 7 years ago, when investors wanted one clear leader, I told everybody to put your name first. Grant's eyes changed, I remember. Do you? Yes. I told them we would fix the credit when the company was stable. Grant was silent. We never did. His voice dropped. That was your decision too. I know. That stopped him. Marin placed one hand over her stomach. That's the part I'm finally taking responsibility for. Grant looked almost wounded. I never asked you to disappear. Not at first. The room went quiet. Grant stepped closer. Is this about Sloan? Marin nearly laughed. He still wanted it to be. Because if the problem was Sloan, then he could fire someone. Apologize. Buy time and repair the surface. No, she said something cruel to you. Yes, she crossed a line. Yes, and suddenly you want to leave the company and talk like our marriage is ending. Sloan is not the reason. Then what is? Marin met his eyes. You stopped seeing me. Grant's face hardened. That is unfair. Maybe. I know exactly who you are. No, Grant. You know who I was useful as. He looked away. For the first time since entering the room, he had no answer ready. Marin returned to the island and slid a folded document toward him. What is that? My resignation. Grant stared at it. You already wrote it? This morning. You said you didn't know if you want to resign. I didn't, then we talked. He did not touch the paper. What are you going to do? I don't know, Marin. I really don't. Come back after the baby is born. No. Take 6 more months. No. You don't need to decide your entire career right now. I'm not deciding my entire career. I'm deciding that it won't continue at Ashford Meridian. Grant finally picked up the letter. His eyes moved across the first page. What about your equity? My vested equity stays subject to the existing agreements. Naomi is handling it. His jaw tightened at the lawyer's name. And what about us? Marin looked at him. I'm filing for legal separation. Grant went completely still. No. She almost smiled at the repetition. This isn't a board vote. You're not doing that. I already told Naomi to prepare it. He dropped the resignation letter onto the island. Because I didn't move fast enough when Sloan grabbed your wrist? Stop doing that. Doing what? Making her the whole story. She is the reason we're standing here. No. She is the reason I finally stopped pretending. Grant looked as though she had struck him. Marin hated that a part of her still wanted to comfort him. That instinct was precisely why she could not. Within 2 weeks, her resignation became official. Ashford Meridian announced the transition internally in language so polished it almost made Marin laugh. After years of leadership and client strategy, Marin Calloway Mercer will step away from Ashford Meridian to focus on family and future personal projects. We are grateful for her important contributions during the firm's growth. Important contributions. Not foundational, not defining. Important. Marin read the message once and closed it. 3 days later, a former colleague quietly forwarded her screenshots of updated internal materials. Several old strategy decks no longer listed her as principal architect. Where her name had once appeared, the credit now read, Ashford Meridian Strategy Team. Marin sent the screenshots to Naomi. Naomi called within 10 minutes. Do not respond. I wasn't going to. Good. Can they do that? Possibly. That's comforting. The company owns a great deal of work created by employees. Authorship recognition and legal ownership are not always the same thing. So Sloan can erase my name? I said, do not respond. I did not say I was finished looking at it. Marin leaned against the counter in the temporary apartment she had rented on the Upper West Side. She had moved out of the penthouse 4 days earlier. Grant had not stopped her. That somehow made it worse. Naomi continued, what are you doing today? Looking at office space. Silence. Then, for what? Marin smiled for the first time that morning. I think I'm starting a company. Naomi groaned. Of course you are. What? You are every client's worst nightmare. I thought you liked me. I like clients who start companies after I finish explaining their restrictions. You did explain them. I explained that we still need to review them. I'm not contacting old clients. Good, I'm not taking files. Good, I'm not using Ashford pricing. Good, I'm not using their templates. Excellent, I found 4 people willing to join me. Naomi went silent. 4? 2 strategists, 1 operations lead, 1 analyst. From Ashford? No. Naomi exhaled. Thank God. The office Marin eventually leased occupied part of the 7th floor of an aging building near Madison Square Park. It had stained carpeting, 6 small offices, a conference room with a glass wall, and a view dominated by the brick side of another building. Marin loved it immediately. There was nothing impressive about the place, which meant there was nothing to hide behind. She named the company Northline Advisory. The first month was brutal. Marin discovered that being respected inside a successful firm and being trusted as the founder of a new one were entirely different things. Her first major pitch lasted 50 minutes. The client chose a larger competitor. Her second lasted 70. They chose another. The third potential client did not even invite Northline to the final round. At 33 weeks pregnant, Marin stood in the tiny conference room while her 4 employees tried not to look worried. We lost. Her analyst, Ben Adler, gave a weak smile. We noticed. Good. I was afraid the rejection email was too subtle. The group laughed. Marin placed the printed scoring notes on the table. Here's what matters. We scored well on analysis. We lost on execution confidence. Her operations lead, Tessa Ward, frowned. meaning they think we're too small, meaning we haven't given them enough reason to believe small is an advantage. That afternoon, a prospective investor said something less diplomatic. He sat across from Marin at a midtown coffee shop and closed her presentation deck. "You're impressive. That usually comes right before no." He smiled. "There's a brand problem mine? Your history." Marin waited, he continued. "When people hear Marin Calloway, some know the name. But a lot of the market knows Mrs. Grant Mercer." Marin's expression did not change. The investor leaned forward. "There's still a question about whether clients trusted Marin Calloway or whether they trusted Mrs. Mercer." For half a second, the coffee shop disappeared. Sloane's voice returned. "You're nobody without him." Marin looked at the investor. "What would answer that question for you?" "Revenue." She nodded. "At least you're honest." "I'm trying to be." "So am I." She closed her laptop. "I'm not selling you equity today." He blinked. "I didn't offer." "You were going to." A small smile. "Maybe. When I have enough revenue to answer your question, I may not need your money." She stood. "That," he said, "is either confidence or stubbornness." Marin picked up her coat. "I'm hoping it's both." 2 weeks later, Roland Keene called. "Marin, Roland, I hear you've opened a shop, a very glamorous shop. We have one printer that jams twice a day. Sounds like Ashford when I met you."
Worse coffee. I want to move part of Keene Industrial's advisory work to you.
Marin stopped walking. She was alone in Northline's conference room.
Roland, I'm serious, I know. You know the company.
"You know us. I trust you." Her pulse quickened. A client of Keene's size could change Northline immediately. It could cover salaries, create credibility, give her the case study she desperately needed. Marin closed her eyes. "Not yet." Silence. Roland said, "Excuse me? I can't take it yet." "You can. My attorney disagrees. I'm calling you. You didn't solicit me. That distinction may matter legally." "It does. It won't matter in the headline Grant's lawyers write about me." Roland was quiet. Marin continued, "I am not building Northline by spending the next 18 months explaining whether I stole my first client from my husband." "You didn't." "I know. You're really saying no?" "For now." Roland gave a low laugh. "You were always the stubborn one." "So Grant says." "Grant says a lot of things." Marin ignored that. "When Naomi tells me I can compete cleanly, I'll compete. And if I'm still unhappy with Ashford, then make them earn your business until I'm ready to earn it myself." Roland was silent for several seconds. Then he said, "That may be the strangest sales pitch I've ever heard. I'm not selling. That's why it worked." After they ended the call, Marin sat alone for several minutes. Northline needed that account badly. Turning it down felt almost physically painful. But for the first time since leaving Ashford Meridian, she understood what independence actually required. Not simply walking away, not winning, building something that nobody could dismiss as stolen. That evening, Grant called. Marin considered letting it go to voicemail. She answered. "I heard about Keene." Her body went still. "From whom?" "Roland told our account lead he was reviewing alternatives. That has nothing to do with me." "He called you." Marin's grip tightened around the phone. "How do you know that?" "He told me." "And did he tell you I said no?" A pause. "Yes." Marin waited. Grant's voice softened. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." "No. You could have taken the business. And spent a year fighting with your lawyers?" "I wouldn't have done that." Marin almost laughed. "You don't know what you would have done." "I know myself, so did I." Silence. Grant changed direction. "If Northline needs capital, I can help." "No." "Marin, no. It doesn't have to be personal." "It is personal."
I can structure it as an investment. No, a loan.
"No, you're about to have a baby."
Our baby.
"Yes. Then support your child."
I will. My company isn't part of our marriage.
Grant went quiet. Marin leaned against the conference room window and looked at the brick wall across the alley. There had been a time when Grant's money would have felt like their money. His network, their network. His success, their success. Maybe that was why the line between partnership and disappearance had become so easy to cross. "Marin," he said finally, "you don't have to prove anything to me." She stared through the glass. For once, his misunderstanding did not hurt. It clarified. "I'm not trying to prove anything to you, Grant." "Then who?" Marin looked behind her. 4 desks, 1 unreliable printer. A whiteboard filled with client notes, a company so small that losing one pitch changed the entire month. "Myself," she said. Grant did not answer. After the call ended, Marin returned to the conference table. Her team had gone home. On the whiteboard, someone had written the 3 priorities for the next morning. Finish the revised pitch. Call the healthcare prospect. Fix the printer. Marin smiled. No empire, no rescue, no inherited fortune waiting behind a lawyer's door. Just work! She picked up a marker and added a 4th line. Build something they cannot explain away. She stood there looking at the words until the baby kicked hard enough to make her laugh. "All right," Marin murmured, resting a hand over her belly. Message received. Outside, Manhattan moved beneath the evening lights, indifferent to whether Northline survived. Ashford Meridian remained dozens of times larger. Grant still had the clients, the employees, the brand, and the reputation they had built together. Sloan had the office Marin once walked into without knocking and an expanding circle of authority inside the company. Marin had 4 employees, a rented office, 2 lost pitches, 1 rejected investor, and a future she could not predict. For the first time in years, none of it belonged to Grant. The possibility terrified her. It also felt almost impossibly clean. And inside Ashford Meridian, while Marin was learning how difficult it was to begin again, Sloan Merrick was quietly beginning a different project. She was reorganizing the past. One presentation, one authorship field, one archived document at a time. Neither woman yet understood that those changes would eventually become the evidence that destroyed one of them. By the time June Mercer learned to sleep for 4 consecutive hours, Northline Advisory had survived long enough for Marin to stop calling every good week a miracle. That did not mean the company was comfortable. Comfort belonged to firms with deep cash reserves, 3 layers of management, and conference rooms that did not share a wall with a dentist's office. Northline had none of those things. What it had was 12 employees, a narrow suite overlooking Madison Square Park, a client list that no longer fit on one whiteboard, and a reputation beginning to travel faster than Marin could control. Not a famous reputation, not yet, but a specific one. If a client wanted a large consulting army, they hired somebody else. If they wanted the person who sold the engagement to remain personally accountable when the implementation became difficult, they called Northline. That distinction had started almost by accident. Marin had not been able to hide behind junior teams because Northline had barely had junior teams. She had been in every kickoff meeting, every escalation call, every late-night conversation when a client's internal politics threatened to ruin months of work. Over time, necessity had become culture, and culture had become strategy. On a cold Wednesday morning, Marin stood in the Northline kitchen warming a bottle while reviewing a client memo on her phone. Tessa Ward appeared in the doorway. "You know normal CEOs do not sterilize bottle parts next to the office coffee machine." Marin looked up. "Normal CEOs also have executive assistant. You have me, you run operations. I could also hide the bottle sterilizer." Marin glanced toward the conference room. "Is Halprin here?" 10 minutes early. "Of course he is. He also brought 6 people even though he said 4. "Of course he did." Tessa nodded toward the bottle. "And June?" "With my mother until 2. "Grant tonight?" Marin looked at her. Tessa raised both hands. "I'm not asking about your marriage. There is no marriage to ask about. Technically, there still is." "Thank you, counselor. I'm asking because you have a 3:30 with Continental Health. Grant has her from 4 to 8. "Good." That sentence would once have carried an entire emotional storm. Now it was logistics. Not painless logistics, but logistics. Marin had learned that co-parenting with a man you were divorcing required a discipline strangely similar to running a company under pressure. You answered the question actually being asked. You documented what mattered. You did not use every disagreement to reopen the entire history. Grant had surprised her in one important way. He was a good father, not a performative father, not a man who held June for photographs and handed her back when she cried. He knew which formula upset her stomach. He had learned how to fasten the carrier correctly. He showed up for pediatric appointments. He once spent nearly an hour walking the length of Marin's living room because June refused to sleep anywhere except against his chest. Marin hated that this made things emotionally harder. It would have been easier if Grant had failed everywhere. He had not. That was the truth she kept forcing herself to respect. A marriage could fail without every part of a person failing with it. Tessa snapped her fingers. "You disappeared. I'm here. You have a meeting." Marin handed her the bottle. "That is why I pay you." "You do not pay me enough." "I know," Tessa smiled. "So do I." The Halprin meeting went well. Not beautifully. Beautiful meetings made Marin suspicious. The useful ones contained resistance, questions, doubt, people pushing hard enough to expose whether an idea survived contact with reality. By noon, the client had agreed to extend Northline's engagement another 6 months. Marin returned to her office with the contract still unsigned, but close enough to feel real. Then Naomi called. Marin answered immediately. "Tell me I'm not being sued." "Interesting greeting. You only call over lunch when something is wrong." "That is deeply unfair." "Is it inaccurate?" Naomi paused. No, Marin sat. "What happened?" "Roland Keene is reopening Keene Industrial's advisory contract." Marin stopped. Naomi continued. "They are running a competitive process. Ashford Meridian? Invited." Marin already knew the next part before Naomi said it. "So is Northline." Silence filled the office. Outside Marin's glass door, Ben Adler was arguing with someone about a model assumption. The ordinary sound of the company made the news feel larger. When requests go out Friday. Marin leaned back. And you're calling because? Because Roland contacted you last year. I said, no, I know, he contacted me. I know, I didn't solicit him. I know all of this, Marin. Then why do I hear the legal voice? Because the legal voice is why you still have a company no one has successfully accused of stealing from your husband. Marin looked toward the window. What do you need? Everything. If you accept the invitation, I want the scope, the procurement rules, your proposed team. I want to review every category of data Keen plans to give you. I want your people told in writing that nobody uses old Ashford material from personal files, memory archives, screenshots, or anything else they were never supposed to possess. None of them worked at Ashford. Good. That makes my blood pressure lower. And me? You are allowed to have a memory. That sounds generous. You are not allowed to use confidential material simply because you remember it. Marin smiled faintly. I know, I'm serious. So am I. Nosimi's tone softened. This is different from the other opportunities. Yes, if you win Keen, people will say Roland gave it to you because of your history. I know. If you lose, people will say you were never as important as you believed. Marin stared at the desk. I know. And you still want to do it? Marin did not answer immediately. That was the part no one understood about rebuilding. People thought courage felt clean. It did not. Sometimes courage felt exactly like voluntarily walking into the room where your worst fear had already reserved a seat. Yes, she said. Then we do it clean. The request for proposal arrived Friday morning. Keen Industrial wanted a complete operating risk review across 3 divisions, followed by a 12-month implementation program. Ashford Meridian had the obvious advantages. Scale. Industry history. A larger analytics platform. Existing institutional knowledge. Northline had one advantage. Marin knew where large advisory firms became slow. She built her proposal around that weakness. Not Ashford Meridian's confidential weakness. The industries. Large firms often sold senior leadership and delivered layers of delegation. Northline promised fewer people, direct accountability, and a named senior lead responsible for every implementation milestone. When Ben saw the draft, he frowned. We're basically saying we're smaller. We are smaller. People don't usually advertise that. They do if small solves the problem. Tessa looked up from the budget. Can we actually deliver this if we win? Marin appreciated the question. Not with the current staffing plan. Good answer. We hires 2 senior people contingent on award. No giant bench. No pretending we have resources we don't. Ben said, Ashford will bring 20 people into the room. Then we bring 6 who can answer questions. The first round presentation took place at Keen Industrial's headquarters in Midtown. Marin had been inside the building hundreds of times. The security guard at the lower desk recognized her, Mrs. Mercer. Marin smiled politely. Calloway, actually. He looked embarrassed. Sorry, no problem. It was a small moment still. She felt it. Upstairs, Roland shook her hand without ceremony. Marin. Roland. You finally decided I was legally safe enough? My attorney decided you were legally survivable. Roland laughed. I like her already. You would not if she billed you. The evaluation committee had 7 people. Roland barely spoke. That pleased Marin. If Northline won, she wanted Keen's management team to choose them. Not a powerful old man doing her a favor. The questions were brutal. One executive challenged Northline's capacity. Another questioned implementation bandwidth. A third asked whether Marin's knowledge of Keen created an unfair dependency on her personally. Marin did not dodge it. Yes, she said. Right now, Northline is more dependent on senior leadership than Ashford Meridian. That is a risk. A woman at the end of the table looked surprised. You're admitting your own weakness? I'd rather tell you what can fail before you pay me to discover it. The woman leaned forward. So how do you mitigate it? Marin clicked to the next slide. Named secondary leadership on every account. Full decision logs. No client relationship lives only in my inbox. If I disappear for 30 days, you should still know who owns every issue. Roland smiled slightly. Marin pretended not to notice. 3 weeks later, Northline made the final round. So did Ashford Meridian. The final presentations were scheduled 2 hours apart. Grant's team went first. Marin knew because she passed 3 Ashford executives in the lobby when Northline arrived. Sloan was with them. For 1 second, the old instinct returned. Measure her. Read her. Determine whether she looked afraid. Then Marin realized she did not need to. Sloan saw her. Her expression was perfectly polite. Congratulations on making the final round. You two, I suppose Roland wanted to make things interesting. Marin glanced at her. There it was. Not direct enough to challenge. Clear enough to understand. You think he invited us for entertainment? I think Roland is sentimental. Marin smiled. That must be comforting. Sloan's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means if we win, you'll already have an explanation ready. Before Sloan could answer, Grant came through the lobby. He stopped when he saw Marin. For a moment, neither spoke. Grant looked tired, not defeated, just less polished than the man Marin remembered from years of investor meetings. His eyes moved toward her team. 12 employees now? 13 Monday. A small smile touched his mouth. You always hired before the contract was signed. Only when I thought we'd need the person anyway. Sloan interrupted. We should go. Grant looked at Marin again. Good luck. She almost laughed. You too. Northline's presentation lasted 90 minutes. Marin left the building with no idea whether they had won. That was another lesson entrepreneurship had taught her. Sometimes your best work produced nothing. Sometimes a mediocre meeting produced a contract. Anyone who claimed to know in advance was usually selling something. 2 days later, Roland called. Marin answered from her apartment while June slept against her shoulder. You're on speaker, she whispered. I'll try not to corrupt the baby. You have 30 seconds before she wakes up. Northline won. Marin said nothing. Roland continued. Did you hear me? Yes. You don't sound pleased. I'm checking whether I'm hallucinating. You're not. June made a small sound against Marin's chest. Marin closed her eyes. Why? Because you scored highest. Roland. You want the breakdown? Yes. Of course you do. He read it. Ashford Meridian had scored higher on scale and analytical resources. Northline had scored higher on risk identification, implementation accountability, responsiveness, and senior client access. The final difference was narrow, but real. We didn't give you anything, Roland said. I know. Good, because I'm tired of people assuming I make sentimental business decisions. Marin laughed quietly. When can we start? Legal will call. Roland. Yes? Thank you. He was silent for a second. Don't thank me for buying something. Then he hung up. Marin sat on the couch holding June. For almost a year, she had imagined what a victory like this would feel like. She expected triumph, vindication, maybe anger. Instead, she felt something quieter. Proof did not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrived as a procurement scorecard. Across Manhattan, Grant received the news in a glass conference room on the 43rd floor of Ashford Meridian. Sloan was already angry before the meeting began. Roland gave it to her. Grant looked at the scoring summary. No, Grant. He didn't. She has a relationship with him. So do we. She knows their internal history. So do we. Sloan leaned forward. She knew exactly where to hit us because she used to sit inside this company. Grant looked up. That's possible. It's more than possible. You're saying she used confidential information? I'm saying we would be irresponsible not to find out. Grant looked through the glass wall toward the strategy floor. He hated the implication. Not because he trusted Marin completely. That would have been easier. He trusted the version of Marin he remembered. Careful, methodical, almost irritatingly principled about documentation. But he had also watched her build a competing company after leaving him. He had underestimated that once already. How? Sloan's voice softened. Preliminary review. No lawsuit, no accusation. Legal compares Northline's pitch approach with our historical Keen materials and checks whether anything proprietary appears. Grant looked at her. Quietly. Of course. He hesitated, then nodded. Preliminary only. Sloan's expression relaxed. I'll coordinate with legal. Grant should have noticed how quickly she said it. He did not. 4 business days later, Northline received a preservation notice. Naomi called Marin before Marin had finished reading the first page. Do nothing. Marin's hands were already shaking. They think we stole something. They are preserving potential evidence. They sent it to every relevant Northline employee. I know. My people think we're being sued. You are not currently being sued. That word currently is doing a lot of work. Marin. She stood from her desk. What? Do not call Grant angry. I wasn't going to. You are lying. Martin grabbed her coat. I'm calling him in person, Marin. I'm not destroying anything. I'm not threatening anybody. I'm going to ask my husband why his company is implying mine was built with stolen information. Naomi exhaled. Take notes after. Marin found Grant at a quiet hotel lounge near Bryant Park. He arrived 20 minutes late. She put the preservation notice on the table between them. You approve this? Grant glanced at it. I approved a preliminary review. This does not feel preliminary from my side. It is standard. Do not talk to me like I've never worked in corporate litigation. I'm not. You sent a preservation notice to my staff 4 days after we beat you. I did not send it personally. Your company did. My company has an obligation to protect its information. Marin stared at him. I took nothing. I didn't say you did. Then why are we sitting here? Because Sloan raised a legitimate concern. The moment he said her name, Marin almost stood. Instead, she remained seated. What concern? That Northline's Keen strategy overlaps with methodologies developed while you were at Ashford. General client retention principles are not proprietary magic. I know that. Then what exactly are you investigating? I don't know yet. Marin laughed once. It contained no humor. That is extraordinary. What? You're threatening my company and you don't even know what you're looking for. I am not threatening your company. You don't get to define how this feels from the other side. Grant's expression tightened. I have a responsibility to protect Ashford Meridian, and I've spent years watching you confuse protecting the company with protecting your version of yourself. Silence. Grant stared at her. Marin continued, you lost Keen. Yes, you cannot imagine that Northline might simply have been better on this engagement. I can't imagine it, can you? His eyes hardened. I congratulated you in the lobby. That was before we won. That is unfair. Maybe. Grant leaned closer. You think this is about my ego? I think Sloan knows exactly how to make your ego sound like fiduciary duty. He pulled back. Do not make this about her. Interesting. What is that supposed to mean? You spent a year telling me everything was about her. Now suddenly nothing is. Grant looked away. Marin stood. I'll comply with every lawful request. Marin. My lawyers will respond. I'm not trying to destroy Northline. She looked down at him. I believe you. Grant seemed surprised. Marin added, I'm starting to think you can damage something without deciding to destroy it. Then she left. That night, Grant returned to Ashford Meridian after most of the floor had emptied. He told himself he was reviewing the Keen matter. That was how it started. He opened the current account history, then older files, then old escalation notes. One document carried Marin's initials. Another carried her full name. A third listed her as lead on an account Grant remembered handling himself. He frowned. He opened the email chain. Grant had handled the board presentation. Marin had handled the client recovery behind it. He searched another account. Same pattern. Another. Different details. Same pattern. Visible moment, Grant. Invisible repair, Marin. He did not feel threatened. Not yet. He felt confused. At 11:43, he found a 7-year-old email attached to an investor preparation thread. Marin had written it to the senior team. Put Grant's name first. Investors need one clear leader right now. We'll fix the credit later. Grant stared at the words. He remembered the week. He remembered not sleeping. He remembered Marin wearing the same gray sweater 3 days in a row. He remembered her handing him revised talking points before the investor meeting. He remembered winning. What he did not remember was reading this email. Maybe he had. Maybe he had been too exhausted to understand what she was offering. He leaned back. We'll fix the credit later. They never had. A shadow moved beyond the glass wall. Sloan stood in the doorway. You're still here. Grant closed nothing. I'm reviewing historical files. Her eyes moved toward the screen. What for? Keen, you won't find anything useful that far back. Grant looked at her. Why not? Sloan paused. I mean, their current situation is different. Grant returned his attention to the screen, apparently not as different as I thought. Sloan stepped inside. Grant. He opened another archive folder. This escalation system. Marin built it? Sloan's expression remained neutral. The company built it. That wasn't my question. A beat. She was heavily involved in the original version. Grant looked at her. He recognized the phrasing. Heavily involved, original version. Words designed to acknowledge without crediting too much. Words he had begun using himself. Sloan smiled faintly. You knew Marin was good. I did. Then what exactly are you looking for? Grant did not answer, because he no longer knew. The review had started as an attempt to discover what Northline had taken from Ashford Meridian. Instead, Grant had begun discovering what Ashford Meridian had taken from Marin, not legally. Something more difficult to define. Credit, memory, history. Sloan watched him for several seconds. For the first time since Marin left, fear moved beneath her composure. Small, controlled, but real. Grant turned back to the screen. I want the original archives preserved exactly as they are. Sloan's gaze sharpened. They already are. Good. He looked at her. Make sure they stay that way. Sloan nodded. Of course. Then she left. Grant remained alone. On the monitor, Marin's old email still waited. We'll fix the credit later. Across the city, Marin was rocking June to sleep while Naomi prepared Northline's response to the preservation notice. Neither Marin nor Grant knew what the next major contract would force into the open. But Sloan did understand one thing. Grant had begun looking backward. And if he looked long enough, he might discover that the woman Sloan had worked so hard to replace had never been merely a former executive. She was part of the foundation. For the first time, Sloan understood that Marin was not only becoming a threat to Ashford Meridian's business, she was becoming a threat to the story Sloan needed Grant to believe. The invitation arrived at Northline Advisory at 8:17 on a Monday morning. Marin was halfway through a client call when Tessa appeared behind the glass wall of her office holding a printed email against her chest. Marin ignored her. Tessa pointed at the paper. Marin kept talking. Tessa mouthed, "You need to see this." Marin held up one finger and finished the call. What happened? Tessa placed the email on her desk. Archer Vale Industries. Marin looked down. Archer Vale was a national manufacturing and logistics corporation preparing for a restructuring across 6 divisions. The engagement would run more than a year. Every major advisory firm in New York wanted it. Northline had submitted credentials 3 months earlier. Marin had assumed they were too small to survive the first cut. She read the email twice, then a third time. We made the final round. Tessa smiled. We made the final round. Who else? 2 firms. Marin looked at her. Tessa's smile faded slightly.
Ashford Meridian. Of course.
Marin leaned back. For almost 2 years, she had worked to build something that could stand without Grant Mercer's name attached to it. Now, the clearest test of that work would put her directly across from him. Tessa sat. If you want to withdraw, nobody here will think less of you. Marin looked up sharply. Why would we withdraw? Because this won't be treated like a normal pitch. It is a normal pitch. It won't be to the press if anyone hears about it. Then we don't pitch to the press. Tessa studied her. Marin tapped the email. We earned the invitation. We prepare like we earned it. By Wednesday, the Northline conference room was covered in process maps, staffing models, and handwritten notes. Marin refused to build the proposal around Ashford Meridian. Every time one of her employees mentioned what Grant's team might do, she redirected them. What does Archer Vale need? Not what Ashford would propose. Not what Sloan would attack. Not what Grant would expect. What did the client need? The answer became clear after 2 weeks of interviews. Archer Vale did not suffer from lack of expertise. It suffered from distance. Senior executives hired advisors, advisors delegated to directors, directors delegated to associates, and by the time a problem reached someone with authority to change anything, 3 weeks had passed. Marin stood at the whiteboard late one evening. We don't beat scale with more scale. Ben looked at the staffing chart. So what do we beat it with? Accountability. Tessa leaned forward. Meaning? 1 senior owner for every work stream. No hiding problems 3 levels down. No client hearing for the first time in a steering committee that something failed 2 weeks ago. Ben nodded slowly. That's expensive. So is failure. Marin drew a line through half the organizational chart. We sell fewer layers. Tessa smiled. Grant will hate this. Marin capped the marker. I don't care what Grant hates. Across town, Grant was hearing a different strategy. Sloan stood at the front of Ashford Meridian's executive conference room with a pricing model behind her. We use scale, she said. Northline can't match us there. Grant looked at the slide. You want to cut fees by 18% for the first year. That would make the engagement barely profitable. It would also make Northline irrelevant. Grant's gaze lifted. We're trying to win Archer Vale, not bankrupt Marin. Sloan's expression hardened. They are now the same problem. No. They took Keene. They won Keene. Because she knew the account. Grant closed the document in front of him. We lost Keene because our implementation score was weaker. Sloan stared. 6 months earlier, Grant would not have said that. 6 months earlier, he might have found a reason the client had made the wrong choice. Now he had spent too many nights reading old files. Too many emails carrying Marin's name. Too many systems he had assumed simply belonged to Ashford Meridian. Sloan noticed the change. That was exactly what frightened her. You're defending her. I'm reading the scoring report. She is competing against your company. Our company. Sloan went still. Grant heard his own correction. Once Marin would have made it. He looked away. Rebuild the pricing without the lost leader strategy. Sloan gathered her papers. You're making this personal. Grant looked at her. That's interesting coming from you. The final presentation took place in Archer Vale's Manhattan headquarters on a rainy Thursday. Northline presented second. Marin stood before 9 executives with no dramatic entrance and no attempt to hide the size of her firm. We are smaller than the other finalists, she began. One board member raised an eyebrow. Marin continued. That is either a weakness or a design choice. You should decide which after the next 45 minutes. She walked them through Northline's client accountability model. Every workstream had a named senior owner. Every failure trigger automatically reached executive review within 24 hours. Every key decision had a visible decision log shared with the client. No hidden escalation chain. No presentation designed to make bad news look prettier before leadership saw it. An Archer Vale executive interrupted. What happens when your senior people are overloaded? We cap simultaneous engagements. So you turn down revenue? Yes. The room shifted. Another executive said, most advisory firms would never say that in a pitch. Marin smiled. Most advisory firms want you to believe capacity is infinite until after you sign. The chief operating officer leaned forward. And if you win 3 major clients in the same quarter, we do not accept 3 major clients in the same quarter unless we can staff all 3 at the level promised. That limits growth. It protects delivery. Marin paused. You are not hiring us to grow Northline. You are hiring us to fix Archer Vale. That was the moment she knew they had a chance. Not because anyone smiled, because people stopped taking notes and started asking real questions. 2 days later, Marin was feeding June breakfast when her phone rang. Tessa, Marin answered. If the office is on fire, call the fire department. We won. Marin froze. June slapped one hand against the tray. What? Archer Vale, we won. Marin sat completely still. Tessa laughed through the phone. Say something. Are you sure? I am looking at the award letter. Marin closed her eyes. For 1 second, she was back at the private club, 7 months pregnant, listening to Sloane tell her she was nobody without Grant. Then June threw a piece of banana onto the floor. Marin opened her eyes. Send it to Naomi before we sign anything. Tessa laughed harder. That is the least cinematic reaction imaginable. It is also why we still have a company. At Ashford Meridian, Grant received the result in silence. He read the procurement summary. Northline had not won on price. Ashford Meridian had actually offered a lower blended rate. Northline had won on executive accountability, implementation transparency, and speed of escalation. Grant placed the report on his desk. Sloane stood across from him. They chose her. They chose Northline. Same thing. No, Sloane's eyes narrowed. Grant continued. That distinction is exactly what we have been getting wrong. She folded her arms. Meaning I keep expecting her company to behave like an extension of Marin. It isn't. Sloane said nothing. Grant turned toward his computer. I want the original client strategy archives. For what? Because I want to understand why we keep losing on implementation. You already reviewed Keen. Not enough. Sloane's expression changed. Grant, he looked at her. We lost. Yes, I want to know why. For the next 3 hours, Grant worked backward through Ashford Meridian's earliest records. The deeper he went, the more familiar the pattern became. A client crisis, Marin's notes, a recovery plan. Grant's presentation, another crisis. Another set of Marin's handwritten comments transferred into a clean executive deck under his name. He did not discover that Marin had secretly done everything. That would have been easier to dismiss. What he found was more uncomfortable. They had been complementary. Grant had been the public force. Marin had been the internal stabilizer. He raised capital. She protected the revenue supporting the valuation. He convinced investors the company had a future. She prevented clients from leaving before that future arrived. Then he found the file that changed everything. 3 cornerstone accounts. All 3 had prepared termination notices within the same 6-month period. All 3 had stayed. The recovery documents named Marin as lead negotiator. Grant stared at the dates. Those accounts had later appeared in the investor deck he used to secure the financing round widely credited with saving Ashford Meridian. He remembered that night, the applause. The board chairman shaking his hand. A business publication calling him the man who refused to let his company die. The story had not been false. Grant had secured the money. Without that capital, Ashford Meridian would have failed. But without those 3 accounts, there would have been nothing stable enough to finance. His phone sat beside him. He picked it up. Marin's name was still in his favorites, he almost called. Then her phone rang first. Not Grant. Naomi. Marin was still at Northline when she answered. What happened? Naomi's voice was unusually flat. Do not sign the Archer Vale engagement, Marin stood. Why? Ashford Meridian has initiated a formal trade secret and intellectual property challenge. The room seemed to shrink. What? They're alleging overlap between Northline's accountability framework and historical Ashford Meridian materials. That is absurd. I know what you believe. Right now, I care about what they filed. Marin pressed one hand against the desk.
What happens to Archer Vale?
They have frozen the award pending review. Across Manhattan, Grant's office door opened. Sloane stepped inside. You need to speak to legal. Grant looked up. Why? There's an issue with Northline. What issue? We move forward with the intellectual property concern. Grant slowly stood. You did what? Sloane did not retreat. You gave corporate development authority to initiate business protection reviews. Preliminary reviews. The review identified enough overlap for counsel to act. You filed without coming back to me? I acted within delegated authority. Grant walked around his desk. You knew I wanted this handled carefully. I protected Ashford Meridian. You escalated a complaint against my wife without telling me. Sloane's expression turned cold. Your ex-wife. Grant stared at her. She is still legally my wife. Not for long. That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with this. You keep forgetting that Marin is not sitting at home waiting for you anymore. She is taking our clients. She is beating us for contracts. She won contracts. With systems she learned here, that does not make them ours. Sloane's eyes flashed. You gave me authority to protect this company. Grant's voice dropped. I gave you authority to protect it, not weaponize it. At Northline, Naomi forwarded the disputed exhibits. Marin opened them one by one. Old process charts, archived client material, comparison tables showing supposed similarities between Ashford Meridian's historical model and Northline's new framework. Then she reached the fourth exhibit. Marin stopped. Her eyes moved to the lower right corner. A small formatting convention. Nothing dramatic. A numbering style used in decision logs. Marin knew it immediately because she had argued against it when Ashford Meridian adopted it. Months after she had resigned, her pulse quickened. Naomi, I'm here, this document. What about it? They're representing this as one of my old framework files? Yes, it can't be. Why? Marin enlarged the page. Ashford didn't use this formatting when I worked there.
Silence.
You're certain? I sat through the meeting where they decided to adopt it. I was already gone. Naomi's voice sharpened. That doesn't prove fabrication. I know. It proves the file may have been modified. I know. And if it was modified for ordinary archival reasons, they will say exactly that. Marin looked through the glass wall at her employees. They were celebrating an award that might disappear before the contracts were even signed. How quickly can we preserve metadata? I'm already drafting the demand. Marin closed the exhibit. For the first time since starting Northline, she did not feel afraid of losing to Grant. She felt something else. Clarity. Someone had touched the past. Someone had changed it. And now the altered version was being used to destroy what she had built afterward. Marin picked up the phone again. Naomi? Yes? Preserve everything. We will. No settlement. No quiet withdrawal from Archer Vale. Naomi paused. You understand what that could cost? Yes. Northline could lose the contract. It could lose money. It could lose clients frightened by the dispute. Marin looked at the company around her. 12 people, years of work. A reputation built deliberately clean. I spent too long letting other people decide what history says about me. Her voice became steady. I'm not doing it again. Across the city, Grant stood alone after Sloan left his office. On one screen was the complaint against Northline. On another were the old records showing what Marin had actually done for Ashford Meridian. For the first time, he saw the shape of his mistake clearly. Marin had never suddenly become his rival. She had always possessed the ability to stand across from him. Grant had simply spent years benefiting from the fact that she chose not to. And now, just as he finally understood what she had given up for him, his own company had accused her of stealing the very kind of work she once helped create. The irony was almost unbearable. But understanding it would not save Northline. Not yet. The contract remained frozen. The accusation remained alive. And somewhere inside Ashford Meridian's archive was the answer to a much more dangerous question. Who had changed the record? Naomi's preservation demand went out before midnight. By 8 the next morning, Ashford Meridian's outside counsel had agreed that no disputed file, archive, email, or metadata record would be altered until the review was complete. Marin arrived at Northline before anyone else. The office was quiet. She stood in the conference room looking at the frozen Archer Vale award letter on the screen. For almost 2 years, she had worked carefully enough that no one could credibly say Northline had been built by stealing from Ashford Meridian. Now, one altered document threatened to make the accusation believable anyway. Naomi entered carrying 2 coffees.
You look terrible. Thank you, I brought decaf. I'm not pregnant anymore.
Habit. Marin took the cup. What did the metadata show? Naomi placed a folder on the table. Enough to worry them. Not enough to destroy Sloan. Marin opened it. Several disputed files had been modified after she left Ashford Meridian. Sloan's executive account appeared in the edit history. Marin looked up. That's her. It shows her account touched the files. She'll say archival cleanup. Of course she will. And that explanation is plausible unless we prove intent. Marin sat. So we need more. We need motive tied to action. Naomi turned another page. There's something else. An email from months before Marin resigned appeared on the screen. Sloan had asked an analyst for editable copies of several strategy files carrying Marin's name. Another message followed. Once Marin is fully out, standardize the authorship fields. The firm owns the work anyway. Marin read it twice. She was already doing it before I left. Yes, is that enough? No. Marin looked at Naomi in disbelief. She asked them to remove my name. She can argue she was standardizing company-owned intellectual property. Marin closed her eyes. Of course she can. Naomi slid one final page toward her. This is harder to explain. Marin, read the sentence. Once she stays home permanently, nobody is going to care whose name used to be on these. Marin felt something cold move through her. Not anger. Recognition. Sloan had not started erasing her after Northline became dangerous. She had started while Marin was pregnant, while Marin still believed she was temporarily stepping away. Naomi asked quietly, "What do you want to do?" Marin looked up. "I want her in a room. 3 days later, 6 people sat around Ashford Meridian's executive conference table. Marin, Naomi Grant, Sloan outside counsel. 2 independent board members. Sloan arrived composed. She wore charcoal gray and carried no visible fear. Marin almost respected that. Almost. Outside counsel began. We are here to determine whether the materials submitted in support of the Northline Challenge accurately reflect Ashford Meridian's historical records. Sloan leaned back. They do. Naomi pushed the first metadata report across the table. Then explain why these supposedly historical files were altered after Marin left the company. Routine archive maintenance. As part of your normal duties? Yes. And removing individual authorship? The firm owns the work. Marin spoke for the first time. I'm not claiming Ashford Meridian didn't own work I created as an employee. Sloan looked at her. Marin continued. I'm saying you changed the record so people would believe I never created it. Sloan's expression remained controlled. You left. That doesn't change who wrote something. You stepped away from the company. I stepped away from a job. Sloan's voice sharpened. You chose motherhood. The room went still. Sloan continued. You chose to leave. You chose to stay home. You chose to stop being part of Ashford Meridian. And now you want everyone to pretend you still own its history because your marriage failed. Marin looked at her. I chose my daughter. Sloan said nothing. I did not choose to have my history rewritten. Naomi placed the emails on the table. Sloan's face changed for the first time. Small, but enough. Grant saw it too. One board member asked, did you write these? Sloan looked down, yes. Why? Because I was consolidating corporate records. Grant leaned forward. Why did Marin being at home permanently matter to corporate records? Sloan turned toward him. Because you had moved on. Grant stared. Sloan's control finally cracked. She was gone, Grant. Somebody had to run what she left behind. You mean replace her? I mean do the job. Marin watched Grant absorb the sentence. For years, he had allowed himself to believe Sloan merely filled an operational gap. Now he was hearing the ambition underneath it. Sloan turned to the board. Marin is deliberately confusing authorship with ownership because it benefits her competing business. Grant interrupted. No. Everyone looked at him. His voice was quiet. Marin was one of the principal architects of our early client strategy. Sloan went still. Grant continued. I knew she was important. I did not understand how much of the system still depended on work she built. He looked toward the independent directors. That is my failure. Marin felt her chest tighten. Grant did not look at her. I also delegated corporate development authority to Sloan while I was involved in a personal relationship with her. Silence. One board member's expression hardened. Grant kept going. I failed to disclose that conflict appropriately. I failed to supervise how that authority was being used. Whatever happens next, that responsibility is mine. Sloan stared at him as though she no longer recognized him. You're choosing her. Grant finally looked at Sloan. No. His voice was almost impossibly calm. I'm choosing the truth after waiting far too long to do it. The independent investigation lasted 6 weeks. Sloan was placed on administrative leave immediately. The final findings were not dramatic. They were worse for her because they were precise. She had altered authorship history. She had used delegated authority beyond its intended purpose. She had provided outside counsel with documents that created a misleading impression of when certain material had been created. And she had failed to disclose personal conflicts that influenced decisions involving Marin. Ashford Meridian terminated her. There were no police, no courtroom spectacle, no sudden criminal charges. Her consequence was professional. A pending executive offer from another firm disappeared after its background review uncovered the investigation. Grant paid too. The board determined that his undisclosed affair with a senior executive had compromised governance. He temporarily stepped away from day-to-day CEO authority. An interim chief executive took control while Ashford Meridian implemented new oversight rules. Marin was cleared, but Archer Vale did not restore Northline's contract, not immediately. Their chief operating officer called her personally. Being cleared of misconduct does not answer whether Northline is ready for an engagement of this scale. Marin closed her eyes. What do you need? A fresh review, compliance audit, staffing verification, final presentation. Tessa stared at her after the call ended. We already won, I know. We have to win again? Yes, that's insane. No. Marin looked through the conference room glass at her employees. It's annoying. Northline's cash tightened during the delay. One investor withdrew. 2 planned hires were postponed. Marin gathered her senior team and placed the financial projections on the screen. We have 4 months of comfortable runway, 6 if we make temporary adjustments. I am not hiding that from you. Ben asked, are layoffs coming? Not today. Later? If we lose Archer Vale and revenue slips elsewhere, possibly. Tessa looked around the room. What do you want from us? Marin answered honestly. Time. The team agreed to temporary compensation adjustments at the senior level. Nobody called it loyalty. Nobody made a speech. They simply stayed. 3 weeks later, Northline completed the audit. Then they presented again. This time, Grant was not there. Neither was Sloan. No marriage, no affair, no old company history. Only Northline. 2 days later, Archer Vale called. They had won again. Marin sat in silence after the phone went dead. Then she laughed. Tessa walked in. Good laugh or nervous breakdown? We won. Tessa screamed loud enough for the entire office to hear. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Grant did not ask Marin to reconsider. Marin did not hesitate before signing. Their lawyers resolved marital property, her vested Ashford Meridian equity, Grant's corporate holdings, support for June, and a permanent parenting schedule. Ashford Meridian formally corrected appropriate historical records recognizing Marin's contribution. The disputed intellectual property issues were resolved through a board-approved licensing and release agreement. No one pretended Marin owned everything she had ever touched. No one could pretend she had built nothing either. Outside the courthouse, Grant stood beside her in the cold. So that's it. Marin looked at him. For the marriage, yes. And us? We're June's parents. He nodded. That part doesn't end. No. Grant looked down the courthouse steps. Is that all we'll ever be? Marin could have given him hope. She could have punished him. Instead, she gave him the truth. I don't know. And for the first time, I don't need to know. They left separately. 1 year later, Northline employed 35 people. It was still smaller than Ashford Meridian, much smaller. But in several strategic sectors, clients now invited both firms to the same table. Grant eventually returned as CEO after governance reforms. His authority was no longer unchecked. Sloan never returned. June was healthy, and Marin and Grant had learned how to be parents without pretending they were still husband and wife. After June's first birthday, Grant asked Marin one evening, "Would you have coffee with me sometime when June isn't the reason?" Marin looked at him. "Are you asking me on a date?" "I'm asking for coffee." "Better answer," she agreed. 1 coffee became 3. Then dinner. At a small restaurant downtown, Grant finally said, "I spent years believing you stood behind me." Marin looked across the table. "I never stood behind you, Grant. I stood beside you. You just got so used to everyone looking at you that you stopped turning your head." He nodded. "You're right. That doesn't fix it." "I know. And this does not mean we're getting married again." Grant laughed softly. "Marin, we've had 3 coffees and 1 dinner." For the first time, she laughed with him. Then he became serious. "I'm not asking you to come back. I'm asking if I can keep showing up long enough for you to decide whether I deserve another place in your life. You already have one. You're June's father. I mean, a place you choose." Marin let the silence remain. Then she reached across the table, then earned it. There was no ring, no proposal, no remarriage. Only a beginning. On Monday morning, Northline won another account Ashford Meridian had also pursued. Grant sent one message: "Congratulations, you earned it." Marin stared at the screen. Once those words would have mattered more than they should have. Now they simply made her smile. She replied, "I know." Then she walked into Northline's conference room. On the glass wall outside were 3 lines: Marin Calloway, founder and CEO, Northline Advisory. Her team was already waiting. Not for Mrs. Mercer. Not for Grant's former wife, for their CEO. Marin took her seat at the head of the table. "All right," she said. "Let's begin." And for the first time in her adult life, no other name needed to stand beside hers to explain who she was. This story is fictional and created for entertainment purposes. All characters, companies, and events are fictional and do not represent real people or organizations.